Good morning, boys and girls. It's time for a question of yams again. I hope you are all ready, and I hope you've been listening to these stories. It's amazing to think there are boys and girls way across the world, across the ocean, that love Jesus too, just like you do. Well, Yuri and his dad were learning from the missionaries. His dad got saved, and his dad was learning to understand the Bible. And his favorite verse was, do you remember? God is mighty. And he and a couple of the other men that had been saved decided to plant their yams, their sweet potatoes, with God's blessing and not the blessing of the spirits. Well, the town leaders did not like that at all. They were very upset with the missionaries, and they were hoping that something was going to happen to them. And then one day, Yuri got bitten by a snake, didn't he? The missionaries prayed, and Yuri's dad prayed, and the missionary doctor came, and he had some medicine for snake bite, and slowly Yuri got better. But then the rain didn't come, did it? So now the yams are still growing, but they're very tiny. We are on chapter 6. It's called God's Carving. Remember, God's Carving was what Yuri's dad called the Bible. The next day, Father went to help the missionaries, and he took Yuri with him. Joyce was bent over the table where she did her work. Father sat in a chair, and Yuri did too. He stared at the floor and tried to think of the right words to say. After a while, Father said, "My son wants to know God." Yuri gave Joyce a quick glance. He saw the smile in her eyes. So he asked, "How can you tell what God's talk is?" "I see the words he gave us in his book." He looked at the table. "What words?" She picked up something that looked like a dry banana leaf. It had a row of black marks on it. "These are words," she said. She pointed to the marks. "I look at these words and I hear what they say." Yuri leaned across the table. He stared hard at the black marks, but they didn't say anything to him. Why not? Nope, Yuri can't read, can he? Wouldn't it be sad not to be able to read? He turned to Joyce with a frown. "I hear the words in my head when I read them," she said quickly. Yuri looked at his father. "Can you read these words, Father?" "No." Father's voice was sad. "When I see Joyce making God's carving in our talk, I want to read too, but it will take me a long time. I think my head is very hard." After a minute, he said, "But you could learn right now." Joyce smiled at them. "You could both learn to read, Yuri. I could begin to teach you today if you really want to." Later, when Yuri left Joyce's house, he felt like singing. She had talked to him some more about Jesus Christ. Then they prayed. After that, she started to teach him about the little black marks on the dry banana leaf. Yuri looked up at his father, who walked quietly beside him. "I think I like reading," he said. "Now I know the marks for pig and father and house. Maybe soon I will be able to read God's carvings for myself." His father shook his head, but he had a smile on his face. "There are many more words to learn. Joyce has boxes and boxes of words. But keep on, my son, and you will be glad." They came to a fork in the path, and Yuri turned toward the garden. "Let's go this way," he said. He stopped at the edge of the stream. "Thank God that he has kept this stream from drying up. If all the Christians work with us, maybe our yams will still be good. You can help too." Soon, Yuri was working harder than he had ever worked in his life. Every day he carried buckets of water from the stream all the way up the hill. He dumped buckets and buckets of water over the thirsty yam plants. While he worked, he thought about the words he was trying to learn. Joyce had made the black marks for his new words on pieces of dry banana leaf. that she called paper. Then she had stuck the paper together into a book. Each book had words and pictures that told a story. Now Yuri could read some of the books by himself. One part of God's carving was a book called Mark. It was the book that Yuri liked the best. The first time he read from the book of Mark, he ran all the way home. I read God's carving today, he told his mother. I read it in our own words, and I understood it in my heart, not just my ears. She smiled at him. Maybe you can read it to me too. So now Mother's getting interested in Jesus. He smiled back. Yes, it tells about Jesus Christ, the mighty Son of God. Even the spirits obey him. His mother nodded. I would like to hear about that. For a long time, excuse me, I have a frog in my throat. For a long time, the Christians helped each other with their gardens. The yam vines grew slowly, but they didn't die. It seemed odd to Yuri that they had to water the plants because in other years the rains had come. The people of the village said it was odd too. They shook their heads when Father tried to tell them about the buckets the Christians were using. They told him that they would wait for the spirits to send rain. And while they waited, their gardens dried up. Each day, Yuri looked to see if there were any clouds in the sky. At last he saw a long line of heavy gray clouds roll across the mountains. Rain began to fall. It fell harder and harder until it looked like a solid sheet of water. The little stream became a rushing brown river, and every path was deep in mud. But the rains came too late for the village gardens. The headmen knew that the Christians' gardens had not died. When Sukoso spoke to Yuri's father, his words were like stinging needles. He said the spirits were still angry. Now Yuri understood how Father could be so calm. He knew that from God's carving, that Jesus Christ had power over the evil spirit. The headmen told the people that the Christian yams might grow a little, but even so, they would surely taste bitter. And again, Father told the Christians again and again, God will take care of us. Remember, his carving says, behold, God is mighty. When Yuri went to Joyce's house, he asked her about Father's verse. Where is it in God's carving? I want to read it for myself. Joyce took down the thick black book that she always kept by her table. She opened it to a page in the middle. Yuri bent over the page and he studied it. He looked up at her. But I can't read this. These aren't the words of my village. Joyce nodded. This is a part of God's carving we haven't worked on yet. The missionaries are translating the Bible into Yuri's language. That's why he doesn't understand. He doesn't understand the English. When will you get it done? First, we want to finish the part about Jesus Christ so people can read about him. Yes, Yuri agreed. He tapped the page in front of him. And what is this part of God's carving called? That's a story about a man named Job. Job? It sounded like an odd name to Yuri, but he wanted to read the story. He started to ask, how long? But he stopped when he saw the look on Joyce's face. For a minute, he was silent. I'll help you, he said at last. I'm learning to read more and more. I'll learn faster. I'll help you get the right words. Someday, I will read the story of Job for myself. Much later that day, Yuri said goodbye to Joyce. His head was tired from all the words he had stuffed into it, but Joyce had said he was doing well. Perhaps I will know all the words soon, he told himself. Then I can start to help her. He took a big breath of fresh air. It felt good to be outside again. Maybe he would go to the garden and see how the yams were doing. Now that the rains had come, the plants were growing fast. Each mound was covered with curling vines and shiny green leaves. Father said it wouldn't be long before the yams were ready to eat. Oh, Yuri wished it were today. He liked to eat roasted yams. He liked to eat boiled yams, but he liked them best of all in the good soup that his mother made. The headmen were still saying that the yams would be bitter. Oh, he hoped not. How would the soup taste then? Slowly Yuri left the garden. Behold, God is mighty, he said to himself. I will not worry about the yams. He began to think about the new part of Mark he had read that day. Maybe he'd take it home and read it to Mother too. At last, the yams were ready to dig up. All the Christians came with their families. Oh dear, here's the day they're going to find out. The women and children brought sticks to help with the digging. Yuri stood with the men and watched. The yams weren't very big, but there were a lot of them. Father stepped into the midst of the dusty brown piles. Look at this, he cried. We will have enough. The mighty God has kept us from going hungry. He has answered our prayers. Yuri's mother and the other women loaded their yams into their string bags and carried them off. Now for the soup, thought Yuri. He saw his mother pick some green onions for the soup and chop them up. She peeled the yams and cut them up too. The water in her cooking pot began to bubble, so she stirred the green onions and the yams. She threw in some salt and some ginger. Then she cooked the soup over the fire for a long time. Will it taste like it did before? Oh, Yuri kept asking himself, will it be good? But he didn't say the words out loud. When they sat down to eat, Father bowed his head over the soup. He prayed a long prayer. First, he thanked God for all that he had done to take care of the family and the crop of yams. Then he thanked God that today Sukoso had asked him some questions about God's carving. As Yuri listened, he felt warm inside. Maybe soon God would answer Father's prayers for the headmen. When Father said amen, Yuri opened his eyes. He looked at his bowl, and slowly he dipped his spoon into the steaming soup. It had orange chunks of yams in it and small green bits of onion, and it was the best yam soup he had ever tasted. His father smiled at his mother, and Yuri smiled with them. God had given him words to read and yam soup too. Thank God for such good soup, his father said. Yuri knew what Father was going to say next, and he joined in with all his heart. Behold, God is mighty. Boys and girls, we serve a mighty God, and he's going to get us through this coronavirus crisis too. He will get us through every single crisis. And aren't we glad we can read? Aren't we glad we have the Bible? You younger children, that's why well, you older children too. That's why we've taught you how to read, so you will read the Bible. And we pray that you will. And let's remember what we've learned in this story. God is mighty. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Bye.